Giants of organized crime in the 1930s, Lepke Buchalter quietly built a fortune on the backs of an army of workers and created the marriage between corruption and labor unions in America. Then the mob double-crossed him, and Lepke was headed where no crime boss had ever been, the electric chair. In a tenement on the Lower East Side of Manhattan, Louis Buchalter was born February 6, 1897, into a close-knit Jewish family. His parents, Russian immigrants, Rose and Barnett, already had 6 children. Little Louis would be their last. By the time he was born, his older siblings were already in their 20s, leaving home and starting careers. Rose nicknamed the boy Lepke, an affectionate Yiddish diminutive for Little One. Schoolmates later shortened it to Lepke. Little One was a good way to describe Louis. He would never grow beyond 5'6", and for much of his young life was thin, even sickly.
He was like a little skinny kid with big ears. He was like 90 pounds soaking wet, and he was funny looking.
His family's home at 217 Henry Street was in the middle of a dense ghetto of Jewish, Irish, and Italian immigrants, most barely surviving.
In terms of living conditions, it was terrible. It wasn't a place you would want to live in, and as soon as people could afford it, they moved out as fast as they could.
At Manhattan's public school number 75, young Lepke excelled, especially in math and reading.
When we look at his school record, we can see that he did fairly well. He wasn't a child who was failing.
After school, Lepke would sometimes give a hand to his father, who owned a succession of small shops, including a gas station, a pharmacy, and finally a hardware store. It was there, on a cold March afternoon in 1909, that Barnett Buchalter died of diabetic shock. The 12-year-old Lepke did not cry over his father's death. He showed no emotion at all. Instead, he reacted with a businessman's practicality. He disappeared from his home for days, his family having no idea where he went. One afternoon, he came home with 2 sacks of groceries. It turned out the boy had been skipping school to make deliveries for a neighborhood merchant. Lepke's mother began making ends meet by serving kosher food to Jewish transients sent to her home by her rabbi. Seeing his mother struggle to survive was too much for the teenage boy to bear. There had to be a way to make more money easier. Lepke dropped out of school at the age of 13 and joined a local street gang known for robbing pushcarts. His first theft was anything but a success.
The first arrest was very interesting. The police reported how poor this boy Lepke was, how poor he must have been, because when they arrested him, he was wearing a pair of new shoes, only both shoes were for the left foot.
Police took pity on the boy and released him. Lepke's mother, shocked by his arrest and fed up with New York, told him it was time for them both to leave the city and join his older brother, a rabbinical student who now lived in Colorado. She believed a fresh start could save her Lepke from a life of crime. He was the only one of his brothers and sisters who was in trouble.
Everybody else in the family was legit. One brother became chief rabbi of Denver. A sister was a school teacher, the head of the English department in a high school in New York City. Like that. I mean, everybody was totally legit.
He told his mother he would stay in New York. Lepke knew he could be rich. He just didn't know how.
He took a room in a boarding house and made his living by stealing on the streets. That was a dramatic turning point in his life, and probably therefore in the life of crime in America, too. It's what the Jews would call bashert, meaning that it was like fate. It had to happen.
After Lepke's mother moved out to Colorado, the 15-year-old soon formed his own gang and made a name as a good organizer and pushcart thief. His tactic was simple but effective. Lepke would distract the vendor while a pal would take the merchandise or beat up the salesman.
At a very early point, he could work with others and get others to do the violence, and he would direct it. I don't know if he planned it that way, but it was a way to make money.
One afternoon in 1913, Lepke approached a pushcart full of fruits, vegetables, and flowers. As he walked toward the vendor, he watched a short, fat kid do the same thing.
Probably was thinking that he better get to that apple before the other kid did, because it was like feast or famine.
Lepke didn't recognize his competition, but soon the boys were nose to nose.
And Lepke, being like a diplomat, said, listen, we're both hungry, let's make a deal together. He said, you're bigger than me. I'll keep an eye out and make sure no one's going to see you steal. And they covered for one another, and that's how they probably became friends,
There on the street, a lifelong friendship between Lepke and Jacob Shapiro was born. Shapiro had a nickname, Gurrah, based on a funny way he had of slurring his words together.
My grandfather couldn't say get out of here, so he'd say, get out of here, and the name stuck, It was perfect for him.
In 1915, at his mother's pleading, Lepke moved to Bridgeport, Connecticut, where an uncle said he would help the 18-year-old find a job. 3 days later, he stole a traveling salesman's sample case and was captured by the local police. He was sent to live in the Cheshire Reformatory for a year. After 2 months, he begged the judge to set him free. He told the judge he needed to work to support his mother, brothers, and sisters. He was paroled. Lepke returned to New York, hooked up again with his pal Gurrah, looking for a way to make some quick cash. They tried to rob a butcher shop, but Lepke was caught and sent to Sing Sing for a year. He spent most of the next 3 years in jail. Life behind bars made an indelible impression.
What do you learn in jail? You don't want to get caught and go back to jail. He learned how to use his head, and let others use their brawn, and how to manage things in more of a business kind of way.
When he got out in 1922, he vowed to Gurrah that he would never spend another night in jail. He stepped out of Sing Sing just as Americans were getting used to a new word in their vocabulary, prohibition. Lepke went straight to New York's top bootlegger, Arnold Rothstein, for a job. He helped Rothstein ship liquor from Canada to speakeasies all over the East Coast. The clever and quiet Rothstein was an important figure in Lepke's life.
Lepke's father died when he was a teenager. Arnold Rothstein served as a role model in the sense that Rothstein was very quiet, very conservative, not flamboyant, stood in the background always. And if you follow Lepke's career, he was the antithesis of the flamboyant type of gangster.
Taking a cue from Rothstein, Lepke left bootlegging for a less visible life. He soon found his niche. By 1925, the crowded slums of New York City were slowly giving way to reforms. So were the factories and sweatshops. Labor unions were gaining strength, and class warfare was turning bloody. Nowhere was this more true than in the garment industry.
You had in New York at this time war between the management and the unions, both sides being Jewish. And each side began to use these hoodlums in the wars. As a consequence, they'd hire themselves out to each side. And that's where he began to get the idea, look, if you could control management and labor, you've got it made.
Lepke and Gurrah could see the opportunity in this new line of work. So they joined a gang run by a powerful 5'2" Jewish mobster named Little Augie Organ, who specialized in labor violence. Little Augie recognized that Lepke's calculating business sense and Gurrah's hulking brawn would be profitable additions to his gang. They were just two of Organ's 150-man organization, which was rented out to violently shake up labor disputes. Little Augie wasn't particular about who he worked for, labor or management. He just had a price list with special bargains for repeat customers. If a client wanted an arm or a leg broken, it would cost $5. Murder would cost $25 and up, depending on the prominence of the individual. Little Augie's gang focused on the rag trade, which at the time employed about 1 million people.
The wonderful thing about the garment industry is that you infiltrate the unions, they pay you off. You infiltrate management, they pay you off because they're afraid of you.
Lepke soon grew tired of taking orders from Organ and knew he could run the show better on his own. So he calmly decided to murder his boss and enlisted Gurrah to help him. On the night of October 15th, 1927, as little Augie walked down a midtown Manhattan street, the pair made their move. From the back seat of a black sedan driven by Lepke, Gurrah fired 22 rounds into Morgan's body, killing him instantly. There were witnesses, but none willing to testify. Now, Lepke Buchalter, the skinny kid from the slums, was king of the New York labor rackets. Over the next decade, he would combine his fortunes with the fast-growing Italian mob and mastermind the corruption of organized labor in America. Murder of Little Augie Oregon in 1927, 30-year-old Lepke Buchalter and his partner Jacob Gurrah Shapiro were primed to take control of the newest and most profitable arm of organized crime, the labor rackets. Lepke inherited Little Augie's Jewish crime family, a brigade of 200 starkers, a Yiddish term for violent ones, who were trained to destroy and kill for the highest bidder, whether it be management or labor.
The unions and the bosses would hire the same kind of criminals to beat up people on the lines. And sometimes they worked for one and sometimes for the other, same guys. But Lepke understood that that was stupid. It was meaningless because in the end, the labor and the management would get together and you'd be out. You'd have no more customers.
It didn't take Lepke long to figure out that the future was not in breaking heads on the picket line, but in dominating the unions themselves. It was a radical idea. Imagine a labor union controlled by a gangster. Lepke was among the first to see the potential.
I think at this time he could see that this could be very lucrative. There weren't that many people involved in the labor, extortion in the labor unions. Where in bootlegging, there were lots of people involved. In gambling, there were lots of people involved. In prostitution, for a while, there were lots of entrepreneurs or people involved.
Lepke chose a big target, New York's giant Amalgamated Clothing Workers Union. 50,000 tailors, seamstresses, fabric dyers, and other clothing workers divided into more than 100 locals. He knew he couldn't take on the entire union at once. He told Gurrah, when you kill a man, you aim for his heart, and focused on the smallest but most powerful part of the union, the truckers.
There were 80 truckers. That's 80 trucks taking everything out of the garment center to all over America. And that meant that if you could take that union, then you'd be in charge, and it was easy.
He sent a few of his henchmen down to the truckers' headquarters. They walked in and calmly announced that the truckers now answered to Lepke and Gurrah. The truckers didn't want any part of their racketeering and prepared for a fight. He responded with a gift, a half-gallon mercuric acid bomb. It exploded in the face of the truckers' chief negotiator. Then, Lepke ordered a squad of 50 to beat the rest of the tiny union into submission. His goons brutally attacked the drivers. Within hours, the truckers surrendered. The racketeer took control. He demanded $50 a month in tribute per trucker and ordered them to deliver raw materials to non-union factories outside the city. The truckers grudgingly went along, since the new work meant more money for them, even after they had kicked back part of their pay to Lepke.
Garment shops were leaving New York in droves, seeking non-union, low-wage labor that they could super exploit in the small towns and cities of New Jersey and Pennsylvania. Lepke, by making it possible for truckers who were paying him tribute to deliver to non-union shops, represented a great mortal threat to the union.
Within a year,